A mother vanished while shopping for her son's birthday gift. 3 years later, the boy discovered a car buried beneath a thick bed of rotting leaves, one that looked exactly like the car his mother used to drive. He dialed 911, and the whole town fell silent as police uncovered what lay beneath. Every summer, just as the cicadas began their morning song, Noah would skip breakfast, throw on his baseball cap, and head straight for the edge of the abandoned woods. That's where he'd begin his search, not for leaves, but for something bigger, a sign. Noah Parker was 10 years old, skinny, freckle-faced, quieter than the other kids in his class. For 3 years, he hadn't missed a single summer day in the forest, turning over leaves, digging through soil, combing the underbrush like he was looking for a message left behind in the roots or the grass. "Why are you still looking for 4-leaf clovers? You spent all last summer doing that," Tommy said with a shrug, squatting near the base of a tree. "You already know why," Lily answered with a soft smile, shading her eyes from the sun. "Noah believes if he finds a real one, his mom will come back." Noah said nothing. His small hands kept sweeping aside the grass, parting each leaf. Still just 3-leaf clovers. No luck today. He stepped a little farther, toward a place where an old path had almost disappeared under moss and time. Shrubs brushed against his legs. The forest air was eerily still, as if every creature had paused, listening for something beneath the earth. A glint of silver, tiny, just enough to catch the light for a split second when Noah turned his head the right way. He froze, took half a step back, then inched closer. Nothing but the cicadas now, and the pounding of his own heart. His hand trembled as he brushed away the decaying leaves. Beneath the green-grey moss, his fingers found cold, rough metal. A car. More precisely, the old silver car his mother used to drive. "Noah!" Tommy called from behind. "Where are you going?" Noah didn't answer. He reached out and quickly wiped the dusty window. Underneath, there was a faint, discolored handprint. Like someone had once tried to knock on the glass, clear signs of desperation. Lily came up behind him and saw it. Her face went pale. "No way." "This is my mum's car," Noah said, his voice almost hoarse. "The 2009 Chevrolet. She used to drive me to school in it." Lily grabbed Tommy's hand. Both of them stood silently. Noah pulled his phone from his back pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. But this time, he didn't call his dad. He opened the emergency app and dialed 911, just like Mr. Green had taught them in school. If you ever find something strange in the woods, tell an adult right away. "Eden Cross Police Department. How can I help you?" I think I just found my mum's car. She went missing 3 years ago." When Daniel Parker got the call from the police, he was cleaning off the porch roof, something he did every summer, a way to soothe the emptiness. "Mr. Parker, your son, Noah, just contacted us," the officer said. "He believes he's found a vehicle that may be connected to the 2022 missing person case." Daniel froze. His gardening gloves slipped from his hands and fell to the ground. 3 years. He'd learned to live with the absence, not accept it, not deny it. But hearing those words, spoken by a police officer, made it feel real in a way it never had before. When Daniel arrived, the car was still there, partially sunken into the damp earth. The tires were buried, and the roof was blanketed in rotting leaves. The police had roped off the area. Noah stood beside a young female officer, Deputy Lana Ruiz. Her gaze was sharp, but when she saw Daniel approach, there was a quiet reassurance in her eyes. Daniel didn't need any further confirmation. It was Elizabeth's car. The woman who had left town one summer morning in a yellow dress, saying she'd be home before dinner, but never came back. Daniel knelt beside the shattered window, his fingers tracing the faint outline of a handprint. His eyes were dry, but the crack in his chest was unmistakable. "You sure?" he asked softly. Noah nodded. "It's Mum's. Her hand was that small." No one said another word. They didn't need to. A little ways back stood George Linden, the old forest warden. He'd lived by these woods his entire life, knew every rustle of fir and scent of damp leaves after rain, and yet today he stood there in silence, not stepping forward, not walking away. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of worry, an uneasy gleam. Sheriff Cole Harwood was there too. He looked much older than he had just 3 years ago, and there was something like regret in his eyes. He was the one who'd once said, "Maybe she left on her own." No one believed that anymore. "We'll winch the car up and check inside thoroughly. But the iron-smelling residue's been dry a long time," Lana said, looking Daniel straight in the eye. Daniel didn't answer. He only tightened his grip on Noah's hand. The boy leaned into him, but his eyes stayed locked on the car. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Noah noticed and walked over to him. "Dad?" the boy whispered. Daniel turned and pulled him onto his lap. "Back then, did you ever really think Mum left us?" Daniel didn't reply right away. A bat swooped past the porch eaves, its shadow crossing the window before disappearing. "There were nights I was scared I might have thought that," he finally said. "But my heart never believed it." Noah rested his head against his father's chest. "I never stopped believing Mum was alive." Daniel didn't cry, but his throat tightened. Outside, the night wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of mistletoe and lavender from the far end of the garden, like someone had just passed by, leaving behind a fragile sign that the journey was only beginning. The wind shifted in mid-afternoon, just as thick grey clouds began to crawl down from the hilltops toward the edge of town. The scent of rusted iron and wet grass mingled, forming a heavy, pungent air that quietly foreshadowed something grim. Deep in the woods, the silver Chevrolet was hauled up from the decaying earth, the scrape of metal against steel sounding like the faint cry of time left behind. Deputy Lana Ruiz bent down by the passenger door. Wearing rubber gloves, she touched the smeared glass, tilting her head to peer through the shattered window. A dark, dried brown streak on the seat's edge made her pause. "Old iron-smelling residue," she said quietly, as if not wanting anyone outside to hear. Sheriff Cole Harwood stood behind her, hands on his hips, nodding slowly. "Get a sample," he said, voice rough from too many cigarettes. "And the glove box." Lana reached beneath the steering wheel. A soft click echoed. A phone dropped out, its back split open, screen cracked, battery knocked loose. Nearby lay a folded piece of fabric, edged with delicate, hand-stitched teal thread, the letter E sewn in the corner. Daniel Parker stood a few steps away. He said nothing, just stood there with Noah, both of them watching in silence, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. His eyes were fixed on the small handkerchief. Sheriff Harwood picked up the phone without a word. The screen flickered on for a few seconds before dying again. But in that moment, a single line of text appeared. "Daniel, help me." No timestamp. No reply. Just a broken message, stranded in the void. Daniel dropped to his knees. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just folded in on himself, face buried in his hands, like he was trying to hold together something splintering from the inside. The sound of fabric brushing against his jeans, the wind rustling through the trees. No one broke the silence. Lana stood still beside him. She placed the handkerchief gently into an evidence bag, moving softly, as though afraid to make a sound. But her gaze never left Daniel. Not for a few seconds, then longer. Much longer. Noah sat down beside his father. He didn't say anything either. He just sat there, wide-eyed, the eyes of someone who had understood something far too big to be put into words. From behind, a woman's voice rose, light as mist. Does the E stand for Elizabeth? Rebecca Monroe, freelance journalist, had somehow ended up at the edge of the road, unnoticed. Her curly red hair was loosely tied at the nape of her neck, an old notebook tucked under one arm. She didn't look like someone here to report the news. Her eyes followed the crime scene as if trying to reassemble a piece of memory, something long buried, but never gone. Don't write anything yet, Harwood said without looking at her. I'm not writing, Rebecca replied. I'm remembering what happened before, and I've got a suspicion. The sheriff turned to her, frowning. What kind of suspicion? I received an anonymous email 3 years ago. It said someone was watching Elizabeth, but when I tried to follow up, every lead disappeared. No witnesses, no signs. It was like it had never happened. Harwood exhaled. You know as well as I do. Back then, we found nothing to suggest a crime. No evidence, no cameras, not even a drop of iron-smelling residue. Nothing. Well, now you do, Rebecca said simply, eyes fixed on Noah. Lana got to her feet and began snapping more photos of the scene. She captured the broken glass, the iron-smelling residue stain, the bent side mirror. Each shot felt like a fragment torn from someone's memory, reassembled silently, methodically. Daniel stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. His eyes were dry, but his hand clutched a handkerchief the way a drowning man might cling to the last piece of wood. She didn't just disappear, he said. His voice was steady, but caught in his throat. She tried to call for help. Harwood didn't answer. Then Franklin Pierce, the Parker family's elderly attorney, appeared out of nowhere. His shoes were caked with mud, and he was breathing hard. I just received the news. The car. It is indeed legally owned by Elizabeth Parker, he said, placing a hand on his chest as if to steady himself. I'm afraid there's another matter that ought to be brought up at this time. Daniel lifted his head slightly, his voice hoarse. What matter? Franklin pulled a thin folder from the pocket of his coat, the edges worn with age. 3 months before she disappeared, Elizabeth filed a request to postpone the review of the will regarding the forest land after Daniel's father passed away, because she suspected someone was trying to force her to sign off on it. Force her? Lana frowned and stepped closer. Franklin nodded slowly. We didn't have enough evidence at the time, but there was a handwritten letter sent privately to me, in which Elizabeth wrote, "Someone is watching me. I don't think Victor will stop until he gets that land." Daniel jolted. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Franklin was silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. Because after that day, she vanished. Harwood crossed his arms, his voice growing deeper. So, Elizabeth was the only one opposing the redistribution of the forest land. Exactly, Franklin replied, and under the contingency clause in the original agreement, if one party doesn't respond within 2 years, their ownership rights automatically transfer to the other party. The other party, Daniel repeated, his eyes turning cold, is Victor Rowe. The air grew heavy. Noah looked up at his father, and suddenly the boy's face seemed older than his years. Rebecca finally spoke. Back then, I asked Victor a few times about the forest land dispute. He always said, "That'll sort itself out soon." Once that woman stops getting in the way. She looked up at Harwood. Now it all starts to make sense. Sheriff Harwood stood silent. He glanced toward the forest, toward the spot where the car had once been buried, as if trying to ask his own memory for answers. Rebecca had already jotted down a few words. She looked at Harwood. Do you still think this was just a disappearance without cause? This time Harwood didn't argue. He just stared out at the woods, where the car had lain under layers of rotting leaves for the past 3 years. No, he said quietly. Now I believe. We missed something. And someone. When everyone had gone, Noah returned to the spot where the car had once rested. He knelt down and picked up a single blade of grass. Still 3 leaves. He gently crushed it in his palm, then placed it back on the ground, as if laying it beside his mother's memory, letting it rest in peace. Daniel stood quietly behind his son. In his hand, the handkerchief embroidered with the letter E was still folded neatly, and within that fold lingered a familiar scent, faint and fleeting, like someone calling softly from deep beneath the cold earth. On the old wooden porch roof, the rain tapped in steady rhythms, like someone softly drumming their fingers on an unease left unnamed for far too long. Inside the small Parker house, a warm yellow lamp cast long shadows across the bookshelf and the dust-covered filing cabinet. Noah sat curled up by the window, knees pulled to his chest. He stared out at the rain, though his thoughts were somewhere else. In his hands was a thin notebook with a faded cover, his mother Elizabeth's field journal, the one where she wrote down the names of the plants she used to teach him to recognize on their forest walks. What's the tree with the upside-down berries? Her voice still lingered somewhere in his memory. Holly, Noah whispered to no one. Daniel stepped into the room, the shoulders of his shirt damp from rain blown in when he opened the door. Without a word, he knelt by the wooden cabinet and pulled open the bottom drawer. The one holding the missing persons file from 3 years ago, the letter confirming a failed search, a photo of the car, Sheriff Harwood's handwritten notes from back then. He paused at a printed copy of an anonymous email once sent to the local paper. She was being watched, but no one believed her. Daniel frowned. He had never seen that email before. Noah, do you remember anything else about that day? He asked, eyes still on the file. I just remember Mum smiling, Noah said. She wore a yellow dress. I was standing on the porch. She told me, I'll be back soon. Save me some dinner, okay? He paused. I really thought she'd come back. The next morning, at the Eden Cross police station, Sheriff Cole Harwood was already seated in the meeting room with a full cup of coffee in front of him. He hadn't slept much in days. His temples had grayed further, and his old leather belt hung looser around his middle. Lana, he said as his assistant walked in, the Elizabeth Parker file, pull everything that's still in storage and bring it here. Deputy Lana Ruiz, 28, was quiet and sharp. She didn't answer, just nodded. An hour later, the meeting table was buried under stacks of paper files, printed photographs, and call logs from 3 years back. We couldn't retrieve the camera data from Section 5, Harwood said, furrowing his brow as he pulled out a report. Equipment failure? Lana asked. Unclear. The technician in charge back then was Jonas Blake. He quit last year. He paused. Seemed like a decent kid, but there were complaints. Said he accidentally deleted some files. Or maybe deleted the right ones and just said it was a mistake, Lana murmured. Harwood didn't argue. He simply looked up at the map of the town, pinned to the wall, his eyes settling on the patch of woods to the north, the place where the car had been found. That afternoon, at Monroe's Cafe, right at the Main Street junction, a place Rebecca's family had run ever since her husband passed. The air was as still as any other day. The white-painted wooden windows were slightly ajar, letting in the scent of coffee and cinnamon waffles, mingling with the soft buzz of summer mosquitoes. Rebecca Monroe, an independent journalist with tied-back red hair and a steady gaze, was raising her second espresso when her phone buzzed. Across from her sat Olivia, her only daughter, a high school senior with one earbud in, laptop open and cluttered with search tabs. Her face was eerily similar to her mother's, from the way she frowned while reading, to the habit of biting her lower lip when thinking. "Mom was right," Olivia said, as she typed quickly on the keyboard. "There's an article from 2022 about the woman being followed in Eden Cross. The original was removed from the government archives. But I just found a backup copy on Wayback." Rebecca looked up and reached for the phone Olivia held out. Her eyes scanned the excerpt swiftly. "A woman in Eden Cross reported being repeatedly followed by an unknown man near the edge of the woods. Police believe it was a misunderstanding." "No name mentioned," Olivia added, "but the timing matches. March of that year, the same time Noah's mum disappeared." Rebecca tightened her fingers slightly around the rim of the warm porcelain mug. "And the police called it a misunderstanding." Olivia bit her lip. "You think the person who wrote this was you, right?" Rebecca gave a small nod, not answering directly. She remembered clearly. The article had been edited hastily after a phone call from the mayor's office. No evidence, no witnesses, just the word of a young woman who often wandered through disputed land. But now, it wasn't just a single, isolated story anymore. Now, the car had been found. The iron-smelling residue stain was real. And the cry for help, "Daniel, help me," had never been sent. Olivia shut the laptop and looked her mother straight in the eye. "I want to help." Rebecca was silent for a moment. Olivia was only 17, but maybe she was more grown up than she'd thought. Grown up enough for all the summers the Parker family had spent shrouded in uncertainty. That night, Daniel sat at the dinner table, now cold, across from Noah. The boy was flipping back to the last page of his mother's notebook. "Mum wrote this was her favorite redbud tree by the edge of the North Woods," Noah said. Daniel turned to look at the map, his finger trailing along the forest path. He paused at a small bend, where the woods met the gravel road that had been closed off after a landslide. "Dad," Noah asked suddenly, "if someone took Mum, how could they hide her for so long?" Daniel froze. That question didn't come from a 10-year-old boy. It came from 3 years of waiting, from all the nights he'd sat on the porch, staring into the dark. "Maybe. They knew how to make everything disappear," Daniel said softly. "No sound, no trace. Or maybe no one really looked hard enough." The next morning, Franklin Pierce, the family's attorney, called Daniel. "Daniel, I've gone over the old will. If Elizabeth doesn't return within 3 years, part of the forest land automatically goes to Victor." Daniel said nothing. His ears rang for a moment. It was something Elizabeth had fought against. She wanted everything to remain for Noah. "Do you really think this is just a disappearance?" Franklin asked next, his voice low. Daniel answered after a brief pause. "Number... and I think it's time we turned everything back over." At the edge of town, in a sealed-off rented room, a man had just set down a glass of whiskey. He opened a laptop, typed a few words into a search window, then hit enter. "Elizabeth Parker, missing case reopened." The corner of his mouth twitched. His hand moved to cover the webcam, like it was a habit. Noah stepped out onto the porch before the sun had fully risen. He saw his father's boots kicked off near the door. The car's headlights still flickered faintly through the trees. Daniel had gone back into the woods. Lana crouched low to the ground, brushing aside layers of dry leaves beneath the ferns. Under the rotting foliage were 2 parallel grooves in the soil, stretching a little over 100 feet from the narrow path leading into the forest to the exact spot where Elizabeth's silver car had been found. "A car was towed in here," she said, pulling out a stainless steel measuring tape. "This isn't some random parking spot. Someone deliberately hid it." Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tire marks. Harwood knelt beside Lana, nodding after measuring the spacing and shape of the tracks. These grooves only match the tires of older trucks, somewhere between 2000 and 2010 models, Lana continued. They're not the kind of treads you see on modern tires. This is our first clear sign the car didn't drive itself in. It was hauled. Daniel spoke in a low voice. Victor used to have a 2002 Chevrolet Silverado. Just 3 years ago, he was still driving it around town. At Patel's Auto Care, the fluorescent lights cast a pale glare on the oil-stained concrete floor. Amir Patel, a small-built Indian man with wire-rimmed glasses and grease-covered hands, was replacing the brakes on an old Ford when Lana Ruiz and Daniel Parker walked in. Amir glanced up, but didn't stop working. Shops closed for new work after 5. "We're not here about a repair," Lana said calmly, flipping out her police badge. "I need to ask you about a silver Chevrolet that came through here about 3 years ago. Scratch on the left side. Filthy. Strange smell." Amir looked up again, wiping his hands on his apron. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses. 3 years is a long time, officer." Daniel stepped forward and gently laid a photo on the counter, an image of the car, freshly pulled from the woods. Amir bent over, Stuars gonned it closely. Silence. Then he said, "I remember that car, but I'm not sure about the date." "We could check your payment records," Lana offered. "There aren't any. Cash, one-time deal, no name." "Do you remember what the driver looked like?" Daniel asked. Amir shook his head. "Baseball cap. Never took off the sunglasses. What I do remember is the smell, real bad. Like dried iron-smelling residue mixed with bleach. It stuck to my sleeves." "License plate?" Lana asked. "All I remember is a V, slanted lettering. I remember thinking, is that the guy's initial, or some kind of code?" Amir hesitated. "I'm sorry, I didn't ask questions. He paid, I did the job." Daniel repeated slowly, "Victor. Rowe." Amir didn't confirm, but his face lost a bit of color. A few hours later, in a bare interrogation room at the town police station, George Linden, the forest warden in his 60s, wearing a worn wool coat, his hands trembling slightly, was invited in. Harwood sat across the table, placing a thin file folder in front of him. Lana stood beside him, arms crossed. "George, in your initial report, you stated that you didn't notice anything unusual around the northern woods in April 2022. But the patrol records show you were stationed at Checkpoint 3, less than 500 meters from where the car was found." George hunched his shoulders. "I remember it rained that day. Heavy. Trees were down. I didn't go far in, just stayed by the outer post." "Did you receive any money from anyone after that time?" Lana asked, her voice sharp. George hesitated. His cloudy eyes shifted toward the photo pinned to the wall behind Harwood, a picture of an old church deep in the maple woods, as if searching for an escape. Harwood didn't let up. "We checked. There was a cash deposit into your account, $2,500, from an anonymous source, mid-May silence. The only sound was the slow whirring of the ceiling fan overhead." George slowly lowered his head. His voice dropped, like he was confessing to himself. "There was a man. Met me at the edge of the woods. Said all I had to do was keep quiet if anyone asks. Didn't give a name. But he gave me money. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was alone. Sick. Who was that man?" Lana pressed forward. George bit his lip. His eyes welled up. I'm not sure. He wore a hat, sunglasses too, but I'd seen him before, at the reading of Daniel's father's will." Harwood's voice dropped. "Name?" George nodded slowly. "Victor." Victor Rowe. Lana looked at Harwood. No words needed. She returned to the station and pulled up the old security footage. Most of it had been lost in a system failure that year, back when Jonas Blake, a tech with a record of improper data deletions, was in charge. Still, in one surviving clip, a security camera from the butcher shop near the forest's edge had caught a silver-grey pickup truck speeding by. Lana paused it, rewound, then played it back in slow motion. The windshield offered only a fleeting glimpse of the driver's silhouette, but the build, square jaw, broad shoulders, all matched Victor Rowe. Daniel walked in, just as she replayed the clip. "That's my cousin," he said, his voice steady. And that was the day Elizabeth disappeared. Lana looked at Harwood, then back at Daniel. If Victor was driving that truck, then this isn't just a missing person case anymore. Daniel opened the bedroom door and stepped inside without turning on the light. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. He stopped at the edge of the bed, leaned down, and lifted the pillow with the pale floral case, turning it over. A faint scent rose from the fabric, dried lavender. He stayed like that for a moment, as if one more breath might be enough to pull time backward. The past hadn't let them go, no matter how steadily the present ticked on. Elizabeth opened her eyes for the first time after a long night she couldn't recall. No light, no clear sounds, just the smell of damp wood, rust, and the soft scurrying of insects, as if coming from underground. A wooden cellar. She tried to sit up, her hands scraping against the rough floorboards. No ropes, but the door was locked from the outside. A metal bolt. She pushed. Nothing moved. A day passed. Footsteps. Then a knock. Victor spoke from outside, his voice light, almost casual. "Porridge. I don't want you dead. But if you keep being stubborn, I can't stop what's coming." Elizabeth said nothing. She didn't ask why. She didn't plead. Just stayed silent, as if saving her strength for something that mattered more. Meanwhile, in another fold of time, where summer still lingered, Daniel was confronting the things Elizabeth had once left behind. Night. Rain poured down. Wind slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying a biting chill. Elizabeth curled up against the wall. A thin piece of metal jutted out from the corner and cut into her hand. Iron-smelling residue ran, but instead of tossing it away, she hid it in her sleeve. Daniel opened the small drawer beside the vanity. A bundle of handwritten letters, postcards, and a small photo of Noah holding a bunch of wildflowers. One letter was half finished. "Someday, when you ask me about hope, I'll tell you the story of that first spring in Eden Cross." He sat down, buried his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He just stayed like that, motionless, for a long, long time. In the thick darkness of the cellar, Elizabeth tried to leave behind something the dark couldn't swallow. She carved a small message into the beam. "Noah, I'm still here." A dull blade, iron-smelling residue on her hand. The carving was crooked, but clear enough for someone to notice if this door ever opened again. She didn't remember the date, didn't know whether it was raining or sunny outside. All she knew was that where she sat, in a damp, cold corner of an underground cellar, there was the smell of rotting wood, rusted metal, and her own scent after weeks without a bath. She reached into a small cloth pouch and pulled out a worn object. A tin toy car, its silver paint chipped on one side, the front slightly dented. A small gift she'd bought in a rush in the neighboring town on that fateful morning. "For a 10-year-old boy?" the shopkeeper had asked. "Yes, it's my son's birthday," she had smiled. The last smile before everything fell apart. She never imagined she wouldn't be able to come back, that the gift would never be handed over. That very day, when she left home with a small wrapped box and a light yellow dress, would become the last memory Noah would ever have of his mother. "If you still remember me, if you still believe, Then you have to leave a sign." Elizabeth whispered to herself, as if reciting a lullaby. The writing on the wooden beam, thin and fragile, like her hands, was all she had left to hold on to. She took a handkerchief and stitched the letter E into one corner with red thread pulled from a torn shirt. Then she tucked it under the wooden table leg. The next day, she smashed her phone. The screen cracked, but the light stayed on. She opened the Messages app, hastily typed, "Daniel, help me," then slid the phone into the gap between the seat cushions. Victor came back at sunset. "Just sign the transfer papers for the land. You know that'll save you, don't you?" Elizabeth looked at him. Her eyes held no fear, no anger, only weariness, but not defeat. "You'll never win my trust." She said it softly, as if to herself. Victor didn't answer. He shut the door harder than he had the day before. At Eden Cross Elementary, Miss Wendy was grading papers when Noah shyly placed a sheet on her desk. "A poem I wrote. No title." Wendy smiled and nodded. But as she read, the smile slowly faded. "There's a door that doesn't open to the sky, but Mum is inside. The wind speaks to me through the crack, and Mum whispers, 'I'm still alive.'" Wendy folded the paper and called Rebecca Monroe during recess. "Rebecca, I need you to see this." Noah described a place with a wooden door, a crack, and the sound of wind. "No one ever told him about where Elizabeth was kept," Rebecca said after a few seconds of silence. This can't be his imagination." At that same moment at Monroe's cafe, Olivia was reviewing the forest map. She marked the spot where the car had been found and noted the usual summer wind direction. From that data, Rebecca formed a hypothesis. If Noah can put into words what his mother feels, maybe it's because there's some kind of connection between them. Not superstition, intuition. In the dark, Elizabeth ran her fingers over the carved letters. Her hand traced the deepest groove, as if trying to find herself again. Outside, summer was beginning to settle in. The next morning, a hunter reported finding dried red stains beneath a large boulder, nearly 400 meters from where the car had been discovered. Sheriff Harwood immediately ordered the investigation team back into the forest. As night fell, Daniel pulled up in front of the red brick building at the end of Union Street. The law office of Franklin Pierce was old, but not outdated. The brass nameplate on the door still gleamed, like its owner, a man not easily worn down by time. Daniel tightened his grip on the doorknob before pushing it open. Franklin was standing by the bookshelf, turning the pages of a file, with hands as careful as if he were retracing a distant memory. He didn't turn around at the sound of footsteps, only said in an even tone, "I figured you'd come sooner or later." Daniel paused for a second, then said, "I want to review all the documents related to the forest land and any instances when Victor requested a transfer." Franklin closed the file in his hands and turned. "You sure about this, Daniel?" Digging up old matters rarely brings anyone peace. There are things no one wants to do, but still have to be done. A moment later, they sat across from each other under the soft glow of a yellow desk lamp. The files were spread out on the table. Franklin pointed to one page. Victor proposed a redistribution of ownership for the Northern Forest lot in July, 3 years ago. The timing matches Elizabeth's disappearance, but the proposal was rejected because it lacked her consent signature. Daniel nodded, eyes fixed on the copy. "He kept that from me." Franklin slid another stack of papers forward. "And this is a repair request for the cabin area. Name listed, Rick Dover, a small-time construction worker who did seasonal jobs up in the northern woods. I suspect Victor authorized it. There's no clear reason given, just a note about roof renovations and adding an iron lock. At the time, Rick was behind on rent. Victor probably exploited that to get him to work without asking questions. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Rebecca Monroe pulled up in front of an old maintenance shop. Inside, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair was wiping oil from his hands. Rick Dover. She walked over, her voice calm. "You did some work at Victor Rowe's request, didn't you?" "A wooden cabin in the forest." Rick frowned. "That was a while ago. Why do you ask?" Rebecca opened her phone, pulled up a map of the forest, and pointed to an unmarked area. "Which part did you work on? Do you remember anything unusual?" Rick hesitated. Then, slowly, he said, "I remember laying down underground wiring. Someone doesn't need electricity just to sleep in a shed. When I asked about it, Victor just said, 'Follow the blueprint,' then handed me cash." Rebecca leaned in. "Do you remember what kind of trees grew around there?" Rick scratched his head. "Yeah, there was a big patch of mistletoe. It had climbed all over a maple tree. I remember because I ate lunch under it one day. Cool shade, quiet as anything." The next morning, Noah brought an old notebook to the police station. Out of habit, Rebecca flipped through the pages. Halfway down page 34, there was a note in purple ink. "Northern mistletoe tree, where Mum used to read to me. Best shade in the world." Daniel sat beside them, his eyes frozen in place. "It's the spot Mum took me to 2 summers before she disappeared." Sheriff Harwood held the map, marking the location based on Rick's words and Elizabeth's notes. He looked over at Lana Ruiz and said, "Assemble the search team. Use thermal scanners and get the drones in the air. Target is the cabin that was overlooked in previous sweeps." Lana nodded and stepped out of the room. The sheriff turned to Daniel. "If Elizabeth is still alive, we'll find her there." Meanwhile, at Rebecca's small house, Olivia was combing through data from the remaining security footage. A blurry frame appeared. A white pickup truck passed along the edge of the forest. On the exact day, Elizabeth vanished. Rebecca leaned in. "Hold it there. Zoom in on the license plate." It was blurry, but the first 3 letters, VTR, matched the truck Victor used. Not solid legal evidence, but enough to take the next step. Later that day, Daniel drove back, following the old dirt road toward the forest's edge. He stopped the car, popped the trunk, and pulled out the map. His hand trembled slightly as his finger traced the turn, right where the mistletoe cluster had been marked. He bent down and picked up a crushed 4-leaf clover from beneath the tire. No one said anything about omens, but Daniel knew faith, however fragile, was leading them where they needed to go. On the radar screen, the drone picked up a strange image, a structure hidden beneath the tree canopy with no clear path leading in. Lana spoke slowly. "We've found it. But the question is, are we still in time?" The steady whir of a drone helicopter echoed across the pale grey sky. Below, the task force led by Sheriff Cole Harwood was making its way through a narrow path near a cluster of mistletoe on the northern edge of the Eden Cross forest. The old maple trees formed a dense curtain overhead. Knee-high grass covered any trace of the former trail. Rotting leaves clung to the soles of their boots, releasing a familiar, damp, musty smell. No one said a word. The only sound came from the GPS unit, emitting its dry, mechanical beeps. "There," said Lana Ruiz, the young police assistant, pointing toward a sunken patch of soil beside a large tree trunk. She knelt down and gently brushed aside the grass. A wooden plank came into view, rotted, its edges covered in moss, but showing clear signs of having once been cut with a saw blade. Daniel didn't wait. He rushed forward and began prying away the decayed boards with his bare hands. Dirt clung under his fingernails, sharp fragments of wood sliced into his skin, but he didn't stop. The pungent scent of damp earth rose up. A layer of black-painted metal emerged, a steel door, chained shut with a heavy, rusted padlock. "This isn't a woodshed," Lana said softly, eyes fixed on the lock. Sheriff Harwood gave the signal. "Break it, now!" Lana pulled out the breaching hammer. 1, 2, 3 swings. The lock shattered, with a crack like dry bone snapping. They hauled the heavy iron door open. Beneath it was a steep, narrow wooden staircase. Freezing air rushed up from the darkness, thick with the stench of rot and something long confined. Daniel grabbed the flashlight and descended first. Each step groaned under his weight like a muffled sob. The beam swept across the space. Mouldy wooden walls, a torn blanket, a few dented steel water cans, a piece of cloth hanging loosely as a makeshift curtain. In the far corner, a figure was curled up, motionless. "Is anyone there?" Lana called out. There was no answer. Daniel slowed his steps. One hand held the flashlight, the other reached out toward the dark figure. He dropped to his knees and lowered the beam. A woman, long tangled hair, emaciated, was lying on her side. Her eyes were barely open, dazed. Her lips were cracked, her breath shallow. But she was alive. "Elizabeth," Daniel whispered, his voice catching in his throat. Elizabeth blinked. The corner of her mouth trembled. No sound came out, only a faint motion of her lips. "Noah," Daniel gripped his wife's hand. "I'm here. You're okay now. You're safe." Above them, Harwood was calling in the rescue team. Lana climbed back up and spoke into the radio. Meanwhile, Daniel gently rolled up Elizabeth's sleeve. A rough strip of cloth had been tied around her wrist, pressing down on a long brown strand of hair. Noah's hair. He'd cut it on his 8th birthday. Elizabeth had said she would keep it as a keepsake. Daniel let out a long breath, his eyes filled with tears. Not far off, Sheriff Harwood and a technician had found a wooden board nailed to a ceiling beam. Scrawled across it were the words, "Wait until he finds you." Harwood clenched his hand gently, looking down at Daniel, still kneeling beside Elizabeth. "She never gave up," he said quietly. The medics arrived. A young EMT, Zoe Harper, quickly assessed her condition. Severe dehydration, malnourishment, but pulse is steady. Elizabeth was lifted onto a stretcher. They wrapped a thin blanket around her frail body. Lana walked beside her, never letting go of her cold hand. Outside, the first light of day was starting to filter through the clouds. The sun was just beginning to blush along the horizon. As Elizabeth was carried up to the surface, a soft breeze stirred, rustling the mistletoe overhead. Daniel followed behind, his boots sinking into the mud. He bent down, picked up a 4-leaf clover that the wind had blown to the edge of the pit. Quietly, he slipped it into his coat pocket. The ambulance engine roared to life. Harwood stepped back and called Rebecca. "Tell her to be ready. If Victor finds out about this, he'll do whatever it takes to run." Not far away, inside the abandoned gas station Victor had once stopped at, a phone screen lit up. A message appeared on the encrypted app. They found it. Time to pull out. Victor tightened the straps of his backpack, his eyes darkening. An hour later, a patrol car pulled up to Victor Rowe's house. The door stood wide open. Inside, the place was empty. On the table sat a still warm cup of coffee and a single handwritten note. It wasn't me. The door was still open. Victor Rowe's house sat at the end of the valley, nestled in chest-high cornfields, eerily quiet, as if no one had ever lived there. The coffee cup on the table was still warm. Beside it was a scrap of paper with a hastily scrawled message. It wasn't me. Sheriff Harwood gave the room a quick once-over, then motioned for the forensics team to move in. No signs of struggle. Nothing out of place. Everything was too still, too clean, too perfect. Like a stage just after the curtain had fallen. "We're half a step too late," Lana said quietly, flipping through a small notebook she'd pulled from a drawer. Inside were forest maps, hand-drawn layouts of the northern area, with several red ink circles, exactly where Elizabeth had been found. Harwood pulled out his phone. "Lock down every exit out of the county. Check private airfields. He knows we're coming." But Victor hadn't gone far. A traffic cam at the fork heading into town caught footage of his old pickup turning into an abandoned gas station, then swinging back toward the western tree line. 2 hours later, he was found at his wife's uncle's long-deserted farm, once used as a winter hideout. When the police stormed in, Victor was sitting calmly in a torn armchair, as if waiting for someone. Lana stepped in first. "Victor Rowe, you're under arrest for suspicion of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and aggravated assault." Victor smirked. "You sure about that? I don't see anyone hurt." Harwood didn't respond. He motioned for the handcuffs. They searched the house. In the bedroom, they found an open safe containing fake passports, bank cards, stacks of cash, and a folder with photos of Elizabeth, a time-tracking log, and a copy of the inheritance document. Franklin Pierce was present as they went through the folder. He held the copy, sighed. He once suggested redistributing the land, but Elizabeth refused. The property can't be transferred without her signature. Now it's all too clear. At the police station, Victor sat in the interrogation room, hands cuffed and resting on the cold stainless steel table. A light shone directly onto his face, casting a long shadow, making his eyes appear deeper, harder to read. Daniel entered. He quietly sat down across from him. They looked at each other. "You really thought you could hide everything under the trees?" Daniel asked, his voice steady, calm. Victor leaned back, shrugged. "I didn't hide a thing. She was crazy. She left on her own, locked herself away. Maybe she just couldn't stand you." Daniel didn't react. He opened a paper bag, pulled out Elizabeth's handkerchief, the one embroidered with the letter E, stained with old red marks, found in the car. He placed it gently in front of Victor. "Your fingerprints were on the car window, her iron-smelling residue on the seat, and the message from her phone, 'Daniel, help me,' blocked, unsent. Still want to say she went willingly?" Victor didn't answer. His eyes twitched, but his mouth stayed shut. Daniel gave a slight nod. He stood, but before turning to leave, he spoke softly. "You think you're smart, but you miscalculated one thing. Noah never stopped believing his mom would come back." Victor looked up. For the first time during the entire interrogation, the sharp chill in his eyes was gone. Something cracked. Not guilt, but fear. The kind of fear that comes from being truly seen. When Daniel left, Lana walked in. She placed a photo on the table, an image of the engraved plaque inside the holding cell. "Wait until you find it." Victor looked at it, then turned his face away. Outside the interrogation room, Harwood lit a rare cigarette. Rebecca stood beside him, clutching the tape recorder. "What do you think the court will decide?" she asked. "We've got enough evidence. He's not walking free." "And Elizabeth?" Harwood looked out toward the parking lot, where Daniel was holding the door open for Noah to climb in. "She survived hell. Now, it's Justice's turn." While Victor was in custody, an old letter unexpectedly arrived at the sheriff's office. Postmarked 3 years ago. No return address. Inside were warnings about another shadow lurking behind Victor. That morning, the sky was unexpectedly clear. Sunlight filtered through the early clouds, casting a soft, pale golden light over the roof of the Eden Cross Town Courthouse. Gentle, yet certain, like a promise. Since early dawn, people had been gathering in the square in front of the courthouse. The Reed sisters handed out free cups of coffee from their small truck. Olivia sat cross-legged on the ground with a few classmates, holding a sign that read, "Justice for Elizabeth." The court was holding a special session. In the time-worn oak-paneled courtroom, everyone rose as Elizabeth was wheeled in. Her hair had been cut short, her face gaunt, but her gaze remained steady. Beside her, Noah held his mother's hand, head raised to the crowd like a small warrior. Franklin Pierce sat in the front row with Daniel. He leaned over and whispered, "There's nothing more to say. The truth is clear enough." Daniel just nodded, fingers tightening around his coat strap. The trial began. The prosecutor laid out the charges. Victor Rowe was accused of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, deliberate destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to seize property through coercion. Evidence was presented: a map of the forest, fingerprints, an old video clip, an unsent letter, a carved plaque found in the underground cell, and the testimonies of Rick Dover and George Linden. Victor sat upright and spoke for the first time. "I don't deny I was in the forest, but Elizabeth, she wasn't kidnapped. She went there on her own. I only helped keep her safe while she was mentally unstable." A murmur rose from the back rows. Elizabeth lifted her head, her gaze sharp and cold. Sheriff Harwood stood up to challenge. If it was help, then why was the cellar door locked from the outside? Why fake an accident, wipe the security footage, and pay people to stay quiet? Lana Ruiz presented a copy of the unsigned land transfer agreement. Victor asked Elizabeth to sign this multiple times. When she refused, that's when everything started. Rebecca Monroe played an anonymous email sent from a transmission tower near Victor's farm. It warned of surveillance activity targeting Elizabeth. "You thought you deleted it all, but we recovered the IP address." The prosecutor asked, "So what was the motive, Mr. Rowe?" Victor said nothing at first. Then, slowly, he spoke. "That land belonged to my father. He left it all to Daniel. I just wanted what should have been mine. If she'd signed it, this would have ended a long time ago." Daniel stood, his eyes fixed on Victor. "He left the land to me because you didn't deserve it. Not because I wanted it, but because he knew what was right. And you were willing to lock up my wife for 3 years just to feed your own ambition." Victor lowered his head. For the first time, he didn't respond. The court then called an unexpected witness, Mayor Wendell. In his testimony, he admitted that Victor had pressured him during a city council meeting that year to suspend the investigation. Victor had friends on the county board. "I turned a blind eye because I didn't want trouble. He promised to bring investment into the town." Rebecca produced internal faxes from the county records, documenting conversations between Victor and a real estate agent eyeing the forested land as a future asset. She pointed to the logo in the upper right corner. "This is from Forest Edge Development. Victor had already proposed selling the land once the transfer was finalized. Franklin Pierce was also called to the stand. He confirmed, 'I was asked to notarize a fake contract. I refused. A week later, I got an anonymous letter threatening to revoke my license.'" The curtain. Behind. Victor. Slowly revealed. When asked if she had anything to say to the court, Elizabeth sat up straight. She pulled a small piece of paper from her coat pocket and unfolded it. "I lived in darkness for 1,095 days. I don't remember what the sun looks like anymore, but I remember my son's smile every morning before I went to the market. And it was Noah, my son, who brought me back. I forgive the darkness, but I will never forget. And I hope no one here ever turns a blind eye to injustice just because it hides behind the trees." In the back of the courtroom, Mrs. Edith Parker stood. The elderly woman who had once doubted Elizabeth now stepped forward and embraced her in the middle of the gallery. She whispered, "My girl, I'm sorry." Noah stood up. He opened his notebook and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote this for my mum when no one believed she was still alive. Now I want to read it because she's home." His voice trembled slightly. "Mum, I found a leaf. It has 4 clovers, just like you said, that it means good luck. I keep it under my pillow every night and dream of you, reading by the soft yellow light." A deep silence fell over the courtroom. Sniffling could be heard. It was as if the whole town held its breath, then broke into quiet sobs. The judge read the verdict. The defendant, Victor Rowe, is found guilty on all charges. He is sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. No one objected. No one stood up in his defense. Daniel turned to Elizabeth. She said nothing, just gripped his hand tightly. Outside, the townspeople stepped aside as Elizabeth was wheeled toward the car. It was as if the whole town bowed in silence, honoring her survival, not just in body, but in the unyielding strength of her spirit. That afternoon, with the sun slanting across the backyard lawn, the Parker family kitchen once again filled with the warm scent of apple pie. The blare of ambulance sirens and the hurried footsteps of police officers were gone, replaced by the soft clinking of wind chimes on the porch and laughter echoing from the living room. Sounds the house hadn't heard in 3 years. Elizabeth sat on the sofa, her hair now cropped short, framing a face still thin but no longer pale. Her eyes, once dimmed like light buried underground, were now warm and alert, like the early summer sun. Beside her, Noah lay on his stomach on the carpet, coloring a new drawing. A family beneath the moonlight, with a curtain of mistletoe hanging gently behind them. Daniel walked in from the backyard, his hands covered in soil. He had just sealed the old cellar door, the one that had held darkness for the past 3 years, and planted a few lavender bushes around it. Every nail driven in, every shovelful of earth laid down, felt like a quiet, steady farewell. The evening settled slowly. At the dinner table, the 3 of them sat down to eat together, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Rebecca Monroe came by after the meal, carrying a copy of the morning paper. On the front page was a photo of Noah, beaming, holding up a certificate that read, "The town's bravest citizen." Ms. Wendy, his teacher, stopped by too, bringing him a book about medicinal herbs, the same kind Elizabeth once used to teach her son how to tell poison ivy from lucky clover. "Do you remember this one, Mum?" Noah asked. Elizabeth nodded, her fingers trailing across each page. "I even remember the pages you used to secretly doodle on." The whole family chuckled, not loudly, not boisterously, but enough to sweep away whatever remained from the old year. As everyone tea was gonned up, Elizabeth slowly walked into the old bedroom. In the corner of the closet, kept safe by Rebecca all this time, was a small silver-blue box. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, the gift from back then was still there. A small, silver tin toy car, slightly scratched, but clean and gleaming like it always had been. She picked it up and walked out to the living room. "Noah," she called gently, "I never got the chance to give you this on your 7th birthday." The boy turned around. Elizabeth placed the small toy in his hands. "I was going to give it to you on that camping trip. I picked it out carefully, because I knew how much you loved cars, and how you always took such good care of them." Noah ran his hand lightly over the top of the car, then looked up at his mom. "I still have a spot saved for it on my shelf." That evening, Daniel took Noah out to the backyard, where the garden was now ringed with lavender and soft sunlight. He handed his son an old letter, handwritten, never mailed. "It's a letter your mum wrote to you before she left." Noah unfolded the paper. The handwriting was smooth and steady, though a few lines wavered. "My dear son, if one day I don't make it back in time, don't be afraid. I'll still be here, in the wind, in the mistletoe we once sat beneath. I believe you'll find me, not with your feet, but with your heart." The boy said nothing. He simply folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. Daniel rested a hand on his shoulder. No words needed. That night, the three of them sat together in the living room. A warm lamp glowed. The rocking chair swayed gently. Elizabeth read a story, her voice smoother now, pausing every so often to stroke Noah's hair. Daniel sat beside them, his eyes never leaving the two of them. "I used to think I couldn't come back," Elizabeth said, "but you called to me. Somehow, I heard you." Noah looked up. "I knew you were still listening. Every time I looked for a four-leaf clover, I could feel you watching." Rebecca captured the moment, not for the newspaper, but for herself. She printed a small photo and pinned it onto Noah's newest painting. On the wall, a frame made from old oak wood. Inside the picture, a small hand pressed against a glass window. On the other side, a soft light and a mother's gentle smile. The town of Eden Cross had lived through another summer. No fanfare, no fireworks, just quiet knocks on doors, warm dinners shared, and nods exchanged between neighbors who once said nothing at all. The Parkers were no longer victims. They stood as proof that some things, when held with faith, are never truly lost. The end of a painful journey is still an ending, but it is also the place where faith is kept whole. Noah didn't give up. Daniel didn't stop. Elizabeth didn't surrender. And in the end, what was right found its way home. This story isn't just about a disappearance or a crime covered up. It's a reminder that love, whether silent or broken, always leaves a trace. And sometimes the quiet determination of a single child is enough to stir justice into motion. What would you feel if you were the mother forgotten in the depths of the forest? Have you ever held on to a belief for years, even when no one else believed with you? Or more simply, are you feeling like you just need someone to truly listen? You deserve gentleness from yourself after everything you've tried so hard to carry. Take care of your skin tonight before you sleep.